Bond Oversight Committee members on this. And we're very happy to have this very large conference, larger than we've ever had before or our predecessor organization ever had before. Let me start with a big thank you for Moss Adams, the international accounting and consulting firm, our sponsor for this live conference. While many CPA firms have decided that the many specific added details of government accounting, auditing, and reporting are more than they can care to deal with and have exited doing government audit work, Moss Adams has embraced government audit work as one of their firm specialties and has a particularly large presence in California K-12 and community college work. We are very pleased to have them beginning the technical portion of our session today, explaining many of the ins and outs of getting the necessary and required audits done and done properly, and the role of CABOC members in this vital process. On your screen, you now have the agenda, if you could please, for the day. There are three main technical panels. There will be Q&A after each of these panels. And then we have some important CBOC and how it works matters. CABOC has only been in existence for a bit over 2 years, but we already have well over 4,000 people, including over 2,000 CBOC members on our email list. Our site has a large collection of technical resources, which we are adding to technically. This conference is a prime example of one of our major initiatives, training sessions for both new and experienced CBOC members. We will be expanding such training, particularly in a series of online short sessions on particular items of interest. We are distributing information on technical matters and news several times a month through our email list. We are building a strong legislative program, working with elected officials in Sacramento to clarify the duties and responsibility of CBOCs and assist K-12 and community college districts and boards in understanding their required commitments to make the oversight process work. A matter that, frankly, unfortunately, many of them still need quite a bit of help with. Finally, we have a number of experienced people who have been there and done that, experts on a variety of subjects, many of whom you will hear from today. We are ready and able to provide answers to your questions and one-on-one assistance with addressing your issues. We are available to assist you through our Contact Us button on our website. Just go to California Association of Bond Oversight Committees and you'll see Contact Us. Just hit that, fill out the information as to who you are and how to contact you and your question, and we will get back to you promptly. There will be a question and answer opportunity for each of our three main sessions. After all of our panelists have made our presentation, and this will be done through Zoom chat, post your questions there at any time, including right now, and we will add your questions that come in to the many that we've already been presented with. There will be far more questions than we have time to answer today's sessions, so we will put together a master list of all questions and our responses and send it out to all conference registrants. We will also make all the materials for today's sessions available in a variety of ways, so you don't need to make extensive notes if you do not want to. The entire conference is being recorded and will be available on our website. Excuse me. And the materials such as PowerPoint presentations will also be posted on our website and available for download. Two themes that you will hear repeatedly through this conference are, first, independence. A CBOC must be independent to be able to do the job that the voters gave it in Proposition 39 in 2000. Unfortunately, many districts and governing boards have not fully embraced this California constitutional mandate for CBOC independence, and in CABOC's opinion, may be attempting to control their CBOCs, even down to the details of their own internal operations. If a CBOC does not have the ability to run its own affairs, things as basic as establishing its own bylaws, setting its own meeting schedule and determining its own meeting agenda, how can the taxpayers, the voters, the parents, and other stakeholders believe it will be able to do an effective job of oversight of the actual school construction bond program and expenditures? Second, you will hear about best practices. There are proven ways of doing essential functions that are well known and generally accepted, including in law and regulation. For example, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, has established its government auditing standard. Proposition 39 and its implementing statutes have promulgated many requirements for school construction bond programs, and there are now recognized proper ways to establish school bond construction project list with identification of each project with cost, timing, and details, such as the number of classrooms and number of seats in schools. For CBOC's best practices includes matters such as access to district personnel, reports, and information, and its own independent legal counsel answerable only to the CBOC, and control of its own CBOC website, to name only a few. CABOC is here to help CBOC members and other stakeholders establish working, effective, independent CBOCs that will help ensure that K-12 and community college districts are using best practices to do the right projects and do these projects right, to get the right new construction done and modernization projects implemented quickly through effective use of taxpayer dollars to meet the needs of the students while being fair to the taxpayers by using their tax dollars wisely. Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you just to make sure we've got all of the technical stuff down pat. So take it away. Keith has done an outstanding job in setting this up. We could not have done this without him. Keith.
Good morning. My name is Keith Mueller, and I'm going to be the admin for this particular Zoom meeting. We are, I think, about 15 presenters, and we're going to be trying to juggle a lot of information at the same time. So what you're seeing on the slide right now is this also includes the presenters themselves until they present. Please keep your mics muted because we're starting to get washed back. I can hear that. We're going to be having this meeting when everybody's logging in. You are going to be muted once you're in the meeting, but the chat is the way you can contact the host, and I'm the main host, and all the co-hosts of this meeting. So everybody who's hosting this will see questions in the chat. So you're encouraged to use the chat the entire meeting, okay? We'll have plenty of time for questions during this meeting. And again, anytime you put anything in the chat at this moment, it's being recorded. The slides are at this moment recorded as well, and we will also share the slides later once we're through with this. If you have issues with the size of this presentation on your screen, you can do the zoom options up at the top of your screen to set the ratio, either having presenters on the top of your screen or to the left or to the right. And if you view by speaker, then anybody who's speaking will be the one who's always going to be on top. Now, this is not like a webinar, so it's not a true Q&A session where there's only a limited portal for questions coming into a webinar. This is just a Zoom meeting, but we have a little more flexibility in terms of having the number of people coming on for this particular meeting. So those are just some background logistics. And if there's any problems, just let me know in the chat and we'll work on it. I'm going to give it back to you, Tom. I'm going to start setting up our first presenter.
Very good. Thank you very much. Our first panel is going to be Moss Adams. And I'm going to turn it over to Arthur. And please introduce the team and take it away. Thank you.
I'm actually going to let Steve kick it off.
Very good. Sorry, Steve, I was looking for you and thought you may have had the aforementioned problem, but glad to see you here.
Steve, you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right, no problem. Baby sister is expected any minute, so I wasn't sure if today was going to be the day or not, but very happy to be here. So good morning, everyone. Good to virtually see everyone today. The Moss Adams team here is very excited to present today on how to perform an effective performance audit at CABOC's first annual conference. We trust this information will be very helpful for both districts and oversight members as they determine the appropriate audits to promote accountability and transparency for their organizations. Now, as Tom alluded to, we'll do a quick intro on the Moss Adams Prop 39 Financial and Performance Audit Team. My name is Steve Bacchetti, and I'm a director at Moss Adams, leading our construction advisory practice. Over to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Steve. My name's Arthur No. I'm a senior manager at Moss Adams, and I specialize in financial statement audits of K-12 education agencies and California community colleges. Tammy?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tammy Lohr. I'm a manager with Moss Adams, and I specialize in doing performance audits, really across the board for governmental organizations, which includes school districts. Prior to joining Moss Adams, I was actually a performance auditor for the state of Washington, and so this has been my bread and butter for my entire career.
Okay, on this first slide, we'll talk a little bit about our K-14 team at Moss Adams. On one side of the house, we have a great team of group of individuals that are specialized in capital projects performance audits. So they perform over 50 capital projects annually, which includes performance audits, capital program assessments, cost compliance control reviews, change order reviews, reviewing contracts, construction programs, policies, and procedures. And these programs and project sizes, they vary anywhere from 10 million all the way up to 5.5 billion. So we have very small clients to very large capital project programs that we audit. And then on the other side of the house, we also have a financial statement audit team. So we have a performance audit team and we have a financial statement audit team. So our financial statement audit team, we have extensive experience in auditing K-12s, which includes financial statement audits, bond financial statement audits, performance audits, and certain agreed upon procedures related to different bond programs. As far as the agenda today, what we'll do is we'll talk about and give you an overview of Proposition 39, what that is, go over the definition of a performance audit, talk about how to perform an effective performance audit, and then cover some common construction program exposures, discuss some construction project risk factors, and then cover capital program project audit checklist and some benefits of an expanded performance audit. So we'll talk over those topics this morning. This slide, we talk about Proposition 39. We give an overview of what this proposition. So this proposition allows school facility bond measures to be approved by 55% rather than 2/3 of voters in local elections. With this Proposition 39, it requires that districts or the school district specify that proceeds from the sale of bonds are expended only for specific projects listed in the ballot authorizing the sale of bonds. With this Proposition 39, there's a requirement for an annual financial statement and performance audit. So whenever there's a Prop 39 bond that's passed, the districts are required to undergo a financial statement and performance audit. And then on the next slide, we'll cover a little bit more about what a performance audit is. Tammy?
Great. Thanks, Art. Well, we're really excited to talk to everyone today about performance audits. As Art mentioned, it is a requirement with Proposition 39. So it's really the other side of not looking at financial statements, but really thinking about, are we spending money in the right way? Are we only using funds on the listed projects and not for salary administration in accordance with Proposition 39? There are some key characteristics that differentiate a performance audit from a financial audit. I'll go over some of those. So the first one is that There are very clear and concise specific objectives within a performance audit. There are 4 types of objectives, and we'll go into each one of those. One of them is required, and that's the compliance audit objective of, are we using funds in the way that the ballot measure had put forth? We also compare performance against established criteria. That could be things like rules, regulations, ballot language. But for some of these expanded performance audit objectives, it can also be best practice. And that's something that really differentiates a performance audit from a financial statement audit. And then the last area is that we provide conclusions based on sufficient and appropriate evidence. And that's a term that we will go into in a little bit greater detail throughout this process. And performance audits can only be done under government or generally accepted government auditing standards, GAGIS, or Yellow Book standards. Those are the same thing. If you ever see someone saying we're going to do a performance audit under any other standards, that does not exist. So that is something to watch out for. Great, so let's talk about the 4 different types of audit objectives that GAGIS has established. The first one is program effectiveness and results. This is my personal favorite because it really gives you an opportunity to dig into organizational operations and identify best practices. Where do we have potential gaps that we can identify in order to help you as a district be successful with your bond program? Some examples of potential objectives for this is whether or not that program is producing its intended results. With the bond program, one example that I always like to talk about is whether or not we are having the right types of reporting out to stakeholders. It's really important that we have good reporting out to the community, over to you as CBOC members, in order to make sure that we're supporting public accountability and trust. No district will ever say we're never going to need another bond program. So we need to make sure that we have the right types of communication and reporting in place so that we have that trust with our communities so that they're able to have confidence in our ability to manage these funds, both in this program and future programs. The next area is related to internal controls. So really thinking about how we make sure that activities are being carried out in a way that protects our resources and gives us the best possible outcome with the resources that are available to us. An example here is whether or not we have the right types of approvals in place to procure contracts to make sure that we're only able to use our funds for the allowable purposes. What is the structure or systems in place in order to make sure that we are accountable for that? That ends up being sort of a component of most all of our performance audits for these types of programs anyways, because we do some root cause analysis whenever we identify findings, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The next area is compliance objectives. This is the area that is absolutely required per Proposition 39. Are we meeting our requirements? Are we using funds in the way that we said that we were going to use them? Only for listed projects, only for allowable purposes, and not for administration or salaries. And then the last performance audit objective type is prospective analysis. This is new, this is fancy in the audit world, and this is something where we're looking at what are the trends that are already in existence and how do we use those trends to be able to forecast what we think is going to happen. This is a very new area. As far as I know, only the GAO has really been doing these types of audits. But given our current environment, this could be an area where there is opportunity to help inform the future of a bond program. So for example, if we're thinking about the supply chain disruptions that we're experiencing right now, how would that potentially impact your ability to get resources that are needed for construction? Right? How do we anticipate that that could potentially impact our ability to complete projects on scope, on time, on budget?
This
Great.
is Tom Rubin. I'm just going to interrupt very briefly. For those of you that are sending in questions, when you see at the bottom of your chat screen to who the message should go through to, please select everyone in meeting. Not just the CABOC's admin. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, great. So performance audits are designed to give the objective analysis to support improvements that relate to the audit objectives that were defined within the audit. So we essentially draw conclusions, we identify opportunities for improvement, and the most important component of a performance audit is really the recommendations. We identify gaps in what is actually going on and what should be going on, but we focus on the recommendations as a key element of the performance audit in order to have management understand what are the things that we can do to get better. What do we do to help improve operations, reduce costs, strengthen internal controls? That is absolutely our focus whenever we're doing a performance audit, is really supporting the success of the bond program. So we put a lot of emphasis on the recommendations, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about how we craft our recommendations to make sure that we're able to address the root cause of why we have gaps in performance. Go to the next slide. Okay, so these are three of the key elements within a performance audit as defined by CABOC. We have planning, fieldwork, and reporting as the three distinct phases. Within planning, we need to ensure independence. So there's that word that Tom already said is going to come up a lot today. Independence is very important for performance auditors. We have to prove that we are independent, both as a firm or an audit organization, and then the individual members of the audit team also have to be certified as independent from the subject matter that is being audited. There are also requirements around staffing, roles, supervision, and continuing professional education requirements that auditors have to keep up on to make sure that they are doing their job in the best way possible. And we have to develop an audit plan and a risk assessment. And the risk assessment is unique within a performance audit because it doesn't just look at what is the risk inherent within the program, but it also assesses the risk of, will we be able to come to a conclusion? Will we be able to say, yes, we feel confident in the conclusion that we are able to arrive at? And then the last element within planning is the requirement for fraud risk assessment. So essentially the whole audit team needs to come together and brainstorm what are the opportunities for fraud that exist within the organization based on policies, procedures, based on what we're seeing, and how are we going to fold that information into our audit plan to make sure that we're able to address those potential risks. When it comes to fieldwork, we're required to gather and evaluate sufficient and appropriate evidence. There are a lot of forms of evidence within a performance audit, including interviews, surveys, documentation, and of course, testing of the actual expenditures. There are elements of a finding. This is an area that we'll talk about later that is a differentiator of a good performance auditor with good experience and someone who maybe doesn't have as much experience. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's reporting. So performance audits undergo a quality assurance review. So someone that is not on the audit team actually goes in and looks at all of the work papers, looks at the report, and identifies whether or not they would have reached the same conclusions given the audit evidence. And that is a really good way to make sure that the conclusions are able to be supported. We are required to include a statement of compliance within the work itself, within the report. Look for that, make sure that you have that. And then we're required to gather a management response as well. And that includes a corrective action plan, which is really in line with making sure that we're able to support improvements in the organization based on the recommendations. Great, so let's talk a little bit more about staffing. So auditors are required to have good competence, the experience required for the audit that includes both subject matter expertise in that area, as well as just auditing experience. CABOC defines 3 different types of roles and make sure that we have a plan in place for good supervision, especially of auditors that are less experienced. We have CPE requirements. We have to do 80 hours of CPE every 2 years. And 24 of those hours has to be related to government and governmental auditing. So it's a good way to make sure that we've got a good team on board. Great, so here is the process of a performance audit. So the first area is identify the audit criteria. As I mentioned before, that could be things like best practices. We can say that is a best practice to have these policies and procedures set up in this way, and that becomes our criteria. And that is a great benefit for the district to be able to actually shape its operations in accordance with best practice, not just thinking about what are the baseline requirements. We collect audit evidence to actually figure out what is going on, what is the current state at the district. And then we evaluate those two things and identify potential gaps. If there's a gap between what we're seeing at the district and what our criteria was, we have an audit finding. And the next step after that is critical and sets apart experienced auditors from less experienced auditors. And that is identifying the cause and effect of a finding. The cause is incredibly important. So for example, let's say that we find a $10,000 expenditure that was putting a piece of art in the district office entryway. Okay, well, that was not an illicit project and that's probably not allowable per the expenditure guidelines. But why did that actually occur? Why was that able to be approved and put into place? Why was that part of the bond program? So there's a couple of reasons that could be. Maybe we don't have clear expenditure guidelines. Maybe we don't have the right people in the approval process. Maybe we don't have training for the people who are in the approval process to understand what is or is not allowable, right? We want to do that root cause analysis in order to create recommendations that will help support the district in having good compliance and having good internal controls going forward. And so that's, again, where we often see, okay, we're doing a compliance objective, but we look at internal controls as part of the potential root cause for why we had instances of non-compliance. We also look at the effect. So maybe there was just this one expenditure, or maybe there's potential additional exposure within the bond program. What is the effect of that on our community, on this bond program, on our ability to deliver the projects that we had promised our community? And so again, we then move forward with developing recommendations and conclusions. Those recommendations should absolutely be addressing the root cause of why the gap was able to even exist in the first place. Great, so here we talk about elements of a finding. As you are reading performance audit reports, you should be able to identify these 4 things. If you don't, please ask questions to whoever your audit organization is. Again, we have criteria. What are we measuring against? Is it a best practice? Is it ballot language? Is it public contracting code? You know, is it some sort of regulation? The condition, that's sort of audit speak. That's just what is currently going on at the organization. The cause, we just talked a lot about that. Why do we have this gap between what should be and what is? And the effect of not being able to have that criteria met. And then the last element I would add here is recommendations, but that's not really an element of a finding. Great, so the last area we wanted to cover is management responses. So this is a requirement within a performance audit. We like to see that management is accepting and agrees with the conclusions of the audit that was conducted. But again, the really key element for us in being a good performance auditor is making sure that management not only agrees, yes, we have this problem, but yes, this recommendation will help us be able to prevent this problem in the future. And we are going to do X, Y, Z within a corrective action plan in order to prevent that problem from occurring again in the future. And so that's an area where you as CBOC members can play a key role in saying, okay, management, we had these findings. We want to see what your corrective action plan is. We want to be able to follow up on that and make sure that we are supporting good performance and good transparency and accountability with these funds. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk about the actual construction program and performance audit expansions that can be a big benefit to districts.
Awesome. Thank you, Tammy and Art, and great job. So for common construction program exposures, there's a lot of different types of issues that can undermine a bond program. Common issues, as Tammy noted, is poor financial reporting. So this could be not establishing master planning in the beginning, or having good policies and procedures to update master planning accordingly? How do you track performance? How are the master plan budgets adjusted? What are the transparency requirements to ensure that both the district and all key stakeholders understand what those adjustments are in the prioritization of scope accordingly? Another common area is poor procurement practices and or contract type selection. If you're signing very large lump sum projects with no audit rights, that may not be the most cost efficient method to achieve your bond program objectives. Another thing that we've seen, for example, are project schedule delays, which may be completely appropriate, but if they're not being reported to key stakeholders, including district operations and key stakeholders, there may be perception issues in terms of the delivery of projects. So when districts and oversight members have the right adequate monitoring controls coupled with outside advisors supporting the success of the program, they put them in the best position to mitigate a lot of these common construction program exposures. Okay, so for all these programs, there's different project risk factors. So if your district has only 2 listed projects, it's a $10 million program, you're going to do those 2 projects. That's pretty simple. There are risks associated with that, but it's not as complicated as some of these districts that have multi-billion dollars, a lot of different scopes, over 30 to 50 schools that they need to achieve prioritization and scope as noted within the ballot language. So really understanding your program size and complexity, the types of contracts that are being leveraged. This could be your lump sums, which may be appropriate for smaller type projects, T&M, which may be appropriate for very small projects such as painting that are kind of ad hoc, or the larger capital projects that we'd recommend a guarantee maximum price with right to audit clauses. Owner construction experience. So construction is very technical in its own way. So ensuring that you either have the internal resources to achieve the bond program objectives, or you have outside advisors or third-party construction managers to support your bond program objectives. Project staffing, making sure that it's the not too little, not too much, and as the bond program is ramping up or winding down, that it's the appropriate amount so that you are being cost efficient with your resources. And I'll skip down to contracting competition just because I think in this environment, contracting competition continues to be high. Labor shortages and staffing issues remains constant within the construction industry. And we don't see that necessarily changing in the near term. If anything, it's going to get more complex with kind of some of the mandates that are going on. So ensuring that you understand your programs, the program risk factors will put you guys in the best position for success. So here's a list of common objectives that your program can do. As Art and Tammy noted, the minimum requirement is ensuring that the expenditures are within the listed projects in the bond documents. However, best practice is doing expanded performance audits to promote transparency and accountability. A lot of these objectives are consistent with San Diego Taxpayer Association, and they hit on the key elements that support a successful bond program, whether it's what's the bond program plan, what are the timelines, the review of project estimates and budgets and forecasts, ensuring that they are consistently appropriate for the scope of work. Payment procedures, are you guys paying your vendors within the 30-day requirement for contractors, or whatever the contract is for professional vendors? So a lot of this list is really not everything you have to do, but based off your program's complexities and needs, you may want to incorporate these to ensure that you're using money wisely, you're supporting the bond program objectives, and you're hitting the key objectives of the program to meet the stakeholder needs. And we'll go to the next slide. And again, just another list of things that we often go through depending on the complexity of the project. So with that, I think the next slide is we'll open this up for questions. Oh, sorry. Benefits of an expanded performance audit. So what are the benefits of doing these types of objectives? So really it's project economy, efficiencies, and cost controls. The next being my favorite is identifying risk very early on. We often come across programs that it's towards the end of the program, they've overcommitted funds, they haven't achieved all the scope that they were intended to achieve. They didn't have good reporting or communication reporting to key stakeholders. So when you get to the end of the program and you're having those issues, it's hard to mitigate those risks. It's more of a damage control issue at that point. So when you identify maybe overruns within a master plan early, management can put together a plan, whether it's getting additional resources from the general fund, working on a value engineering for major capital projects, a communication plan, explaining maybe escalation charges are part of this, and this is the new scope based off our scope prioritization. So there's a lot of things you can do when you detect risk early. If you don't detect it earlier, then your program potentially has some of these impacts that we can see really undermine the success of it. Tighter internal controls, project controls, reduction in errors and overcharges. So what I noted earlier, if you do have the guarantee maximum price contracts with right to audit clauses, if there are project charges that are not compliant, you have the ability to go in, audit those costs, and have those types of recoveries for non-compliant costs to ensure that your budgets are being maintained and the cost, the compliance of the cost is appropriate for the contract terms. Next, which I think is huge, is these audits aren't intended to be a gotcha moment. Really, if you have a team of advisors and performance auditors, our job is to message constructively, identify areas for improvement, and support the district and the oversight members kind of achieve their objectives of meeting that balancing list, project list, and ensuring that the projects are meeting the expectations, et cetera. So the performance audits, again, should not be something that are intended, that are gotcha moments. They're really intended to support both the district and the oversight members, meet best practices, and have the best chance of delivering what the voters voted on. And with that, I think we'll go to questions. So I think, Tom, do you want to handle the questions?
Yes, and I'll direct these for you to distribute to your members. First one that just came in: when a bond measure is approved, who is responsible for developing a fraud risk assessment?
So I can take that first question. So the fraud risk assessment is something the performance auditors do when we are planning our engagement for the appropriate scope. So per GAGUS, and I can pass this over to Tammy, whenever we do a performance audit and we have our specific objectives that we are that we're performing, we perform an assessment on the types of fraud risks that could occur to impact those of either the objectives of the program not meeting the stakeholder needs or us not reaching the correct conclusion. So Tammy, I don't know, maybe you want to add a little bit of clarity on that?
Yeah, so a fraud risk assessment does a couple things. So it looks at, potential actual fraud within the program. Again, our team gets together and we sit and brainstorm, okay, well, what are the opportunities that exist right now by thinking about the fraud triangle and things like that. But we also think about what is the risk of non-compliance. What is the risk of fraud non-compliance? And so that's where we're thinking about how are the clarity of the expenditure guidelines, the clarity of allowable versus unallowable expenses. It's quite internal to the audit team whenever we do those, because we want to make sure that we are addressing them. We base that based on the conversations that we have with CBOC members, audit committee members, leadership at the organization, those types of things, as well as if we have history with the organization, understanding what some of their potential exposures could be. And then we incorporate all of that information into the audit plan so that we're able to address those items.
Following up on that, who is responsible internal to the organization that's doing the work? And what is the role of the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee in trying to ensure that the district, as well as the auditors coming by after the fact, are doing the proper assessment?
So I'll take a hit at that. So you're basically asking what's the, whenever we do these performance audits, a best practice is to interview with key stakeholders, including the district and the CBOC members. So based off the nature of the objective, our team, based off our experience, because we focus in this area, we know the types of things that could impact the ability for the district to meet the objectives. So we have our internal meetings and we discuss based off the policies, the internal control, the kind of the staffing structure, what could result in a non-compliance or potentially a fraudulent type activity. When we do the interviews, that's part of the fieldwork process where we're really understanding the different dynamics, what people are the input. So based off our experience, it's a really good practice to interview both district and CBOC members to ensure that we have a good understanding of what the current state is, what the risks are that are being perceived by both the district and the oversight members, so that when we reach our conclusions and report to the key stakeholders, we have a good understanding of what the potential issues are, where the district and the oversight members can improve with the overall objective of supporting a successful program.
Thank you. As a CBOC member, what should I do if the district does not conduct a performance audit?
And I will pass that over to Tammy.
Yeah, so it's required to do a performance audit. And so you need to go to your board and say, hey, we need to do this because it's a requirement per Proposition 39. It's a requirement for the ballot language, and make sure that staff are following through on that requirement.
Thank you. Here is a general financial type audit question. What is the difference between the general financial audit that is performed annually for the entire district and the required financial audit for the bond program, and how do they fit together?
Yeah, so I could talk about this. So for the district financial statement audit, it includes all funds within the district. So you have your general fund, you have your special revenue funds, you have your capital project funds, the bond interest and redemption funds. So you have all the funds within the district. Whereas the financial statement audit for the bond audit is just for that specific measure or the proposition that we're looking at. So it represents just the bond activity for that program. So the district-wide financial statements includes all funds, all transactions for the district, whereas the bond audit financial statements is very specific with that bond measure. The way that it relates to each other is that the bond program, it usually rolls up within one of the funds within the district. It might be a sub fund or it might represent the building fund. So when we do the actual bond financial statement audit, we just scope out that piece where it relates to that bond. And we usually use a lower materiality threshold to look at the financial transactions that are being reported in that bond program.
One last question I'll try to squeeze in. What is the role of the CBOC before the audit actually gets going? And what audit reports, both financial and performance and compliance, of course, within performance, should be presented to the BOC and at what stage in the audits? Thank you.
So I'll take a crack at this one. So the CBOC their role is to ensure that that they present the annual financial and performance audit results when they're completed. We like to incorporate the CBOC within our interview process so that we have a good understanding of the operations, and if there's potential risk areas or ways to improve, that we consider those types of inputs and address accordingly within our report to support a bond program process. Generally, the CBOC members get involved when the report is in the final stages, the final report stages. Part of our process is when we get to the final reporting stage after fact validation has occurred with the district, and I'll kind of go over that. The fact validation is very important within the processes of a performance audit to ensure that when the report goes to final, that there's no disconnects on the facts. It's really the facts are the facts. Everyone agrees on it. The recommendations are appropriate. So we like incorporating the CBOC after we go through the fact validation process to get their input, potentially on or considerations on overall report results, just because they'll be presenting it to the public stakeholders. Nothing generally gets changed at that point, maybe a couple word tailors from there, but really the role for the CBOC is to ensure that the final report's communicated to the key stakeholders after report completion.
Thank you very much. As I hope you can see, I'm giving Moss Adams a hand clapping for their very fine presentation. I will tell you from the many conversations at the CABOC Board of Directors meeting, what you have just heard is the way it should be done. And the reason that CABOC exists is that unfortunately, many times that is not how it is done. Now we're going to go to panel A, and I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to introduce her members and get into it. Carolyn, all yours.
Thank you, Tom. First of all, welcome. You, and I want to thank you for serving on your district Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. You play an important role in ensuring that bond funding is expended wisely. As this panel knows, there is a lot of work in serving in this committee. It can be enlightening, challenging, and fun. Next. For this panel, we have 4 presenters. Let me see you. I think you have to go back one, Keith. Okay. For this panel, we have 4 presenters. I'm Carolyn Castillo. I would like to introduce Nick Marovich, Chris Hansen, and Sally DeWitt. At any time, you can ask questions on the chat, and we will respond at the end of the presentation. Next. Nick, I'm turning this over to Nick.
Thank you. It's hard to follow Moss Adams on such a great presentation, but my point here before I go into my formal presentation is two things. History matters in Prop 39, and secondly, read the law. Read the law will provide a lot of guidance as a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee member. But the genesis of 39 was really happened well before its passage in 2000. Many years prior, 2 things were going on in California. One was there's a significant population growth over a number of years, but particularly in the 80s and 90s. And secondly, there was a lot of schools that were built in the 50s and 70s that were beginning to fall apart. So you had population growth, deteriorating schools, but there was an impediment to getting bonds passed, the 2/3 voter requirement in the Constitution. So in order to get this change, it was necessary, and the legislature recognized so, to change the law through having the voters approve the constitutional amendment, Prop 39. And Prop 39 really was, in a way, a quid pro quo. We gave you a lower voter threshold, 55%. We taxpayers want something in return. We want accountability requirements through having a specific project list as how you're going to spend the money in the ballot measure. And secondly, that their money should not be spent on operating expenses. So operating expenses known, project list. And after the passage of Prop 39, though, there were further things needed to happen to really add some meat to the bones. And that was a change in the education code. Next slide, please. What are you supposed to be doing as a citizen? How are you supposed to be acting? Well, it's right there in the preamble to the education code that allows authorizes or specifies all the requirements related to Prop 39. It's supposed to be an active, vigorous process. Those bold highlight in your PowerPoint there really gives you a flavor of what oversight is supposed to be about. Vigorous, independent, promptly alert the public. It's important to keep these in mind as you're a member of the Oversight Committee. Next slide, please. Well, prior slide. I'm sorry. I think you skipped over one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, forward head. Yeah, I'm sorry. One slide ahead. What are you supposed to be doing as an Oversight Committee member? Your purpose is to inform the public on how the spending is being done. And again, promptly alert the public to those expenditures. And there are specific findings that are necessary as a part of a bond oversight committee that you're supposed to report to the public. That was on capital projects. It was only on projects listed in the ballot measure, and that no funds were spent on operating expenditures. It's important, though, to keep in mind as well that your role is limited. You do not have any authority to approve expenditures or contracts. However, you may have input on those matters. And then stepping back as an oversight member, let me just tell you, in my personal experience, and specifically on, what was on that ballot measure and how are you actually spending the money? I saw instances on a bond oversight committee member where the district let the fire alarms deteriorate so bad they had to have fire watches, and yet they had enough money to spend money on a impersonator at the grand opening of a performing arts center. Why? Because the oversight function was broken. You need to be ever mindful as an oversight member. You're inform the public if you don't see something that doesn't seem to be right. Next slide, please. And in closing.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Nick.
In closing, I'd like to say that it's just important to keep in mind the necessity to have an independent view about the bond oversight function and be mindful of the historical context of bond oversight. Thank you.
And then I'll be taking over. This is Carolyn. In my section, I'll talk a little bit about the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, their role and responsibilities. First of all, as a committee member, your primary responsibility is to conform to Ed Code 15278. And their primarily responsibility is to inform the public. Go back one, Nick, go back one. Keith, one back, okay, there. Is to inform the public of bond expenditures, look at the bond language to make sure that the expenditures are tied into the stated purpose of the bond, review expenditures, invoices, and copies of all audit reports, and visit school sites and inspect the construction. Does it sound simple? Well, it's not really. How do you inform the public? The bond language. You have to make sure that you look at it to make sure that it lines up, but it can be a stretch. Expenditures. Costs are not always well-defined, resulting in not building what the public is expecting to be built. Audits. Audits in some districts only validate that funds were in line with the bond spending, not the process gaps. And visiting sites, having your feet on the ground and observing what is being built. Next. Some common problems is communications from the CABOC. It's always missing because Some districts do not have a CABOC website, and if they do, it's hard to find it. The other one is projects using bond funds are not always listed in the bond language. Expenditures are not always provided. You don't see the details. You only see the summary of what invoices were paid. And then also you're looking at visiting sites. You have to review the construction drawings and keep looking. Look at the placements of equipment and furnishings and the quality of materials. The other one is work being performed. Next. What can you do? First thing is to understand your role and responsibility as a CABOC member. Look at the bond and the projects. Ask questions. Why did it cost so much? What was a construction change notice for? Isn't that too much? What happened to the schedule? Remember that the longer it takes to construct a building, the more money is spent. If it looks and smells fishy, it is. Remember, misuse of funds happen. Becoming an independent CABOC member, what does it mean? We'll go into that in the next session. And reporting to the school board. Your report is critical. Include pictures where possible. The board is looking at your comments and observations. You are closer to reviewing the bond expenditures and construction activities. Remember, at school board meetings, the public is listening. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Chris. Next. And Chris, we have you on.
She muted and unmuted. 1 second.
Okay.
I don't know if she's in the meeting right now. We may need to just keep on going through this. Caroline, I think you're muted right now.
Christine, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself.
She appears to be saying something. We can't hear you. Keith?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay,
Go.
the system would not let me unmute, sorry, and I had cut out. Okay, so what makes a CBOC independent? An independent CBOC determines its own process while operating within the framework outlined in Ed Code that calls on governing boards to establish an independent citizens committee within 60 days of the passage of a bond. So, is your CBOC independent? Do you prepare your own agendas? Can you meet whenever you need to? Do you approve your own bylaws? Are you included in the committee member selection process? Next slide. Why is this important? While Ed Code requires the CBOC to be independent, for the most part, they're not. If you responded no to any of the questions in the previous slide, your committee is not independent. Some districts position themselves as the higher authority by imposing an agenda only allowing informational content to CBOC members that they dictate. And then they channel the communications about bond spending in ways that are difficult for the public to access. If the CBOC determines its own agenda, publishes its own website, questions and reports on the issues it finds to be pertinent, then true oversight of the spending of bond money is achieved. Without this, the oversight process can be distorted by district efforts to protect its own public image, or even worse, misspending or fraud by the district can go undetected and unreported. Next slide. If you find yourself on a committee with others who are not interested in an independent CBOC, you can still contribute an independent voice. As an individual CBOC member, you can bring information and documents to the attention of the group during your public meeting by doing your own research. Your school board and board of trustee meetings contain a wealth of publicly available information about school planning and bond spending. At these meetings, the district brings forward spending resolutions, the facilities master planning process is presented, the district's budget, which should show anticipated bond spending, must be reviewed and reported. A monthly list of purchase orders for spending that falls below the bid process are also presented. As an individual CBOC member, you have the capability to make your voice heard in your meetings. Through your informed questions, even if those meetings are tightly controlled by the district. And perhaps your fellow committee members might rethink the idea of CBOC independence. Thank you. And now on to Sally.
Thank you, Chris. Very important, independence of the CBOC. So I'm here to talk about the facility master planning process. My experience is in West Contra Costa School District in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been a member of the CBOC there since 2016. And before I retired, I was a project budget analyst and planner with Chevron Corporation. Ideally, a district invests in a well-founded facility master plan. The operative word there is ideally, because we rarely actually see this. The board then acts to fund the plan, for example, by listing site-level master plan projects in bond measures. And finally, the board oversees implementation of the plan. Plan, fund the plan, manage the plan. This process is clear and transparent, and it is the basis for effective oversight. The Little Hoover Commission is a bipartisan state board which fosters economy, efficiency, and improves services in the use of public funds. This commission calls for specific project lists and bond measure language, even recommending a change in the education code. If bond measures reference site-specific projects drawn directly from a district's facility master plan, then audits and oversight will follow suit. What is a well-founded master plan? Next slide, please. First of all, it's developed with input from a broad range of stakeholders. This ensures efficient and equitable allocation of public funds, which is usually millions of dollars across a district. The school community knows what the priorities are, as well as the schedule to implement the plan. All facilities projects, regardless of the source of funds, are included in the plan, not just bond revenue related projects. And the plan is a living document, which means it is updated as needs change or become apparent. I want to emphasize that last statement. A plan is a plan. It's not expected that it's not going to change at any point in time. It might change dramatically, but it has a schedule and it has priorities, and everybody understands what that schedule and priorities are. And if you have to make a change, then you have to change the schedule and the priorities, and people get onto the same page. They understand what those priorities and the schedule is. The critical components of a well-founded facility master plan include space standards and space utilization, how space is to be used given current and future space requirements, demographics based on student population trends and requirements, and facilities assessment of the current condition and age of district buildings. These plans are expensive, no question, usually hundreds of thousands of dollars. But just as with any large project, like building a house, for example, stepping back and starting with a good plan not only saves money in the long run, it gets everybody on the same page. And there are other benefits to having a good facility master plan. Next slide, please. A good plan includes how the projects are to be funded, plus the district's capital and maintenance plans. Funding sources besides bonds might include developer fees and state grants. The district's capital plan is going to include all the facilities projects. And a facilities maintenance projects plan serves as a renewal or update of the master plan facilities assessment. To summarize, ideally, a district invests in a comprehensive facility master plan, and this ensures transparency, equity, and trust in the community. Effective bond oversight and audits both depend on specific project lists and bond measure language. Loose, highly generalized project lists defeat oversight from the outset. Nick will speak more about this in his presentation. Nick?
Unmute, Nick.
Thank you. As mentioned previously, Prop 39 was big on accountability. And within that framework, it was intent that school districts would not be given a blank check in terms of spending capital dollars. If you look on this slide here, you'll see two pictures. One, this is for the Sweetwater Union High School District. One was an existing building that needed refurbishment and repair. The type of expenditure that was specifically mentioned in the ballot language. Below is an aquatic center that was never in the ballot measure. And the money was spent on the bottom project, not the top project. So the idea in terms of a bond oversight and member and in the Constitution is there's supposed to be a list of specific projects in the ballot measure. And that's what you're supposed to review as a bond oversight member. 2/3 bond do not require a project list. Next slide, please. Next slide. It is, no, previous slide, but we skipped over one. It's important for the committee to periodically review and compare the project list to the actual expenditures and identify where the project is inconsistent with the ballot measure. The problem is, in many ballot measures, is the ballot language itself is so vague and inconsistent, where it'll list specific projects and then general statements like refurbishment and repair of existing facilities, that getting your hands around the actual project list can be a challenge. Next slide, please. Next slide. So kind of wrap a bow around all of what we've been saying here, and your role as a bond oversight committee that relates to the concept of project list is remind yourself periodically, you're supposed to review those reports on expenditures and compare it to the ballot language. The second thing you should do as a member is question priorities. You know, if the emphasis in a ballot language was health, life, and safety, refurbishment, repair, improvements of existing facilities, yet the money is spent on new aquatic centers, new that don't relate maybe directly to education, athletics, or not that that's part of the process, but you know, things that are maybe should be less priority than the basics of providing education is important. Finally, it's your role to ask questions and to make sure that the audit makes sure that the actual expenditures are compliant pursuant to the audit. So in a nutshell is be independent, ask questions. And if you don't get the answer on those questions, keep asking the questions until you're satisfied that you've been informed properly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're ready to take any questions.
And we have several that have come in. First of all, should the project list that is presented by the voters and overseen by the CBOC be specific or general in nature?
Nick, maybe you can answer that.
Well, if you believe the reading the law literally, it should be specific. I mean, the Constitution says a specific list of projects to be funded. Again, the idea is you borrow, you put before the voters the amount of money you need to spend to build those projects you've identified. So the answer is they should be specific. The practical reality, though, is you want some flexibility to do refurbishments. For instance, if you repair fire alarms, you don't want to name each school that needs a fire alarm. You just say you want to upgrade the fire alarms. So it's a nuance, but generally it should be specific.
And that tree goes directly into the next question. How does a district maintain flexibility to respond to unforeseen problems such as pandemics?
Okay, maybe I can turn that over to Sally.
Sure, I'll be happy to answer that. We always have to have flexibility for different unforeseen events. And that's just part of the planning process. The expectation by the general public, by the board, by everybody involved has to be that the plan is not anything cast in concrete. That said, you can't just not plan and respond to whatever comes up with no idea of exactly where you've been or where you're going. So there's a balance there between following the plan and maintaining a level of flexibility which is appropriate. And I always come back to the schedule and the priorities that are set at the beginning. So if the priorities are critical needs across the district, then you're probably funding and implementing the plan accordingly. And you're doing your critical needs first before you go on to something that's less critical. That way you can respond with flexibility to, dire situations that come up.
Next question. What are some red flags the district does not want real oversight or lacks transparency?
I'll answer that. This is Nick Mrnovich. Asking basic questions like, when will a project be completed? And the answer is obtuse, not directed, and there's just basically not answering questions. Secondly, requesting information from staff and not having that information provided in return is another, just not responding to informational requests. Thirdly, asking for an item as an individual oversight member, being able to ask for an individual item to be on an agenda to be discussed and have it being rejected is an example of not district wanting oversight. Another method might be who provides the training or the introduction of a new oversight member to the committee. Is the training provided just by the staff, or is a member of the oversight committee, or the chair usually, provide them a oversight committee perspective on what the issues are? So controlling the agenda and controlling the information is, who controls those will often be a telltale sign of how independent an oversight committee member process is.
Here's a rather basic question that was asked by a CBOC member that I think really indicates the need for this organization. How do I find my construction bond expenditure list?
Okay,
Chris, are you gonna?
sure, I'll take that. So that is what it sounds like is your project list that is from the ballot language. And you should have your ballot language. You should be able to get to your ballot language for your bond, and you should be able to read that, and as well as the legal text of the bond, which will have the project list explained in more detail. These are things that even if your school is not giving them to you or your district, you can go to the actual registrar's office, or I'm not quite sure what the office is, but they have that information. So that is what you're looking for.
Very good. County Board. of
Carolyn,
Education.
I'd like to jump in here for just a second, because if you do happen to be in a district like West Contra Costa that does have a facility master plan, you can go look at that. It's posted online and you can see what the projects are or should be.
And if it isn't, it should be online.
That's true.
Okay, what can you as a CBOC member do if there is spending on a project not included in the ballot language or the project list?
Oh, maybe I'll take a shot at that. The one thing you can do is you can, number one, understand what it is what's the intention of those expenditures and what happened to it. And really the first place to go is really to your school board members to sort of raise a flag to say, we're concerned about these expenditures being out of line. And it's up to them to take action because you're bringing it up as an issue and they have oversight of our bond expenditures. But I'll share a little experience is that sometimes people who are on CABOC committees, they don't always understand the construction cost. Sometimes you walk into a project and you look at what cost is it. For example, when I was on the CABOC committee, we were doing some innovations to labs. They were classrooms. And my first comment was, how come it costs so much? And people were surprised I was asking that. But the way you can start analyzing it is of the room that they're doing, how much square footage are you looking at in terms of a renovation? In my particular case, it was roughly 900 square feet. The 900 square feet, we spent $600,000 to upgrade to an innovation lab. So that ends up to $650 a square foot. So you say $650. So when you sort of tie it into doing a house remodeling and you only have 800 square feet, that you're looking at somewhere around $520,000 to remodel your house. So you begin to understand this sounds too expensive. So one thing that CABOC members can do is look at some of the questions, do some simple analysis on your own. And the other one is benchmark with other neighboring districts to see how much things cost. That's one way of looking at it. So what can I talk about? But that's what I would do. And I have done, shall I say. So anyway.
I'd like to add, can I add real quick, Tom?
Sure.
Just to piggyback on Caroline, I'd like to also say that your CBOC in the report issues a compliance opinion. And if you can make a clear, delineate the issues to your CBOC and they agree, you can, within your report, state that for that reason, your group doesn't believe that the school currently is in compliance on that particular issue.
Here's a good question that just came in. If the specific list, the wish list included in the bond measure is substantially more than the bond amount, in other words, the number of projects and the cost of projects that were presented to the voters has a dollar value that is substantially more than the bonds that were actually authorized, is it too much to ask to provide a priority list with project schedules?
Can I answer that?
Okay, Sally, go ahead.
It is not too much to ask. That is precisely what a facility master plan would look like, would be a schedule and a priority, and this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it, and everybody's agreed to that. It's not
Very
too much
good.
to ask.
Yeah, Nick, I saw you had a comment.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a bit of a personal opinion, but the constitutional language says a specific list of projects to be funded. And that sort of by implication is that you only ask for the money that you need to complete those projects that you're presented before the voters. Now, it's hard to estimate exactly, give your projects are going to cost X amount, but to way over ask for, list projects that you have knowing full well that you do not intend to will have the funds to fund is disingenuous. And it really shouldn't be done, frankly. The ballot measure should roughly be what, the projects that you want to do. That was the idea of getting the lower voter threshold to 55%, is you wouldn't have a blank check in terms of how you want to spend the money. And so there should be some flexibility for changes, but to way over ask really shouldn't be done.
Yeah, I'm going to add a few comments. As we talked before on the facilities master plan, there's one element that I feel is very critical, and that's to have your facilities assessment complete and it's available. And in some areas, a lot of school districts don't have a robust assessment plan. And that means you might have an Excel document that lists your equipment and the condition at that point of time where the list was developed. And it's not tied into a software system. In today's world, we're now seeing that happening. And that assessment, could help the school board, or for those people who are managing or approving those projects, to understand what are the critical items we need to take care of now in terms of safety. What are the ones that we're seeing that we have to update in 3 to 5 years? You need a plan that gives you a planning horizon of 10 years, but you have critical items to fix in 2 years, between 3 and 5 years. And that facilities assessment is critical to make those decisions. And there's a lot of districts that don't have that robust facilities assessment available to them. So I recommend that go look and ask, what's the condition of the buildings? Do we have a facilities assessment that we can look at? Okay.
What do you do if the bylaws prohibit the committee and or members to conduct independent bond oversight?
Repeat the question again, Tom.
What do you, a CBOC or CBOC member, do if the bylaws prohibit the committee and or members from conducting independent bond oversight?
Can I chime in on this one?
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, great. You can talk to your board, because your board should be able to change the bylaws. Your committee can write a letter to the board and ask that the bylaws be changed. And you also need to remember that you are still an independent tax-paying citizen. So you still have a right to your own opinion and to speak to the board in public comment along those lines. It's difficult when your bylaws, for example, don't allow you to have subcommittees, when you need to really dig down into an issue, or you're not allowed to have enough meetings during the year. It's a tricky question, and it's a big problem.
I'll just say this is one of the topics in my session coming up, but I'm going to have a little bit different response. Here's another one that just came in over chat. One moment. In some cases, the school district will rely on their legal advisor or attorney to interpret and justify the use of bond funds. If the funds are used for relocation of staff due to unexpected damage on a school building, not school district building, not listed, can the CBOC have an independent attorney to get a second opinion?
Let me think about that one. I think, Nick, this is a tough question. I'm gonna.
Oh, why don't you give me the, I would say if the district, only if the district will fund it. I mean, they have to value an independent attorney to do something like that. The only thing, really, it's a difficult, let me just be straight up, it's hard. The way to really do it, and we don't have the time here, is you can file a separate taxpayer waste and fraud prevention suit. I forget the exact name for it, but there's a process in the education code to file that misspending of money. But the practical reality too there, that costs money because you got to get an attorney, a separate attorney, and it has to be done soon before the expenditures are made. So it's a tough thing to do. That's the bottom line, and you have an uphill battle.
Here's another one that just came in, and it's directed to Christine. It says the CBOC at City College of San Francisco, where you serve, is not yet independent. The bond counsel minimized this term and said that the independence is extremely limited. Would you care to respond to that?
Well, it's I agree. And I think what I can also say is that bond counsel also works with about 200 other schools throughout the state. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why I'm hoping that things can change. And that's why I do my own research and present information independent of what we are given in our meetings, and question everything. Yeah, I don't know what else to say on that. I agree. And it's been an uphill battle.
Tom, let me just add one thing. To be an effective, to be really independent, in my opinion, have an independent committee, is you need a strong chair of a committee who's willing to go out and speak with the direction from the committee, who also wants the same thing, to act independent. And you get more independence, frankly, from a committee that is under greater public scrutiny, the one that isn't under public scrutiny. The situation I had with Sweetwater, you had 4 of the 5 board members were under indictment. So they wanted to have oversight because it looked good. And you had a chair who also carried the message. They wanted an independent review. So it takes a strong chair of a committee with the support, under support of the committee, to have effective oversight, in my opinion, and not have a chair who is controlled by the district in terms of things. Can lead a lot to effective oversight.
Here's another good one. Our CBOC is missing a member from a taxpayers group. Can we still meet without that person and add a member at large person?
I think that in my experience, we have had committee members. We try to get 7, but we typically have a difficult time getting a taxpayer representative. And so we keep a position open just when somebody shows up and applies, and let them, and add them at any point in time into the committee. But you can continue to have your CABOC committee missing that one, a couple of people in a particular classification. So as long as you have, usually you're looking at 7. If you can get 7, if not 6 works, as long as you have a quorum. Does anyone have any comments?
You can also note to the board that they are out of compliance with the requirements of Prop 39 and remind them that they need to get someone.
And it can also be reported in the CBOC's annual report.
Yes.
I'll just add that that puts the district in a vulnerable position. If someone wanted to bring a legal action saying that the district was not in compliance with the requirements of Prop 39 and asked that expenditures from the bond funds be halted, they might get some traction. Next question. This is a great open-ended one. What are the most common problems with bond spending?
I could start. I'm sure Carol, everybody could.
Yeah.
And we only have 15 minutes left.
Oh, we got 15 minutes. All right. Well,
I'll use that 15 minutes.
all right. We got problems here. So, well, the number one, usually, I mean, and I don't want to monopolize this, but an inadequate project scoping. That's number one, is that the district has not adequately defined what the project, what kind of project they want to do, what should be the elements of that project. And the scoping could just simply be the fact that not enough people involved in developing what the project consists of. For instance, maintenance wasn't involved in looking at some of the systems, and therefore you get into a project and you find out you need to have change orders because maintenance was involved in developing the project scope. Number one. Number two is inadequate cost estimations, which can be a challenge just because of the environment we are today with the pandemic and supply chain problems. What are the other problems? Inadequate staff oversight of the project, not having enough resources devoted to it. I don't know if you want to add some, Carolyn.
Yeah, the one thing that people may not be aware of that was like a surprise to me is that there was a recommendation by our bond manager at the time to sort of get certification on leads and well certification. And that's so that you can get a certification. And a leads certification means you use a lot of recycled, energy efficient, whatever, but the school board at that time were told that that doesn't cost any more. Wrong. It costs more because whenever you're looking at a building certification, like to get a gold or a premium rating for leads or wells, you have to register it. And then you have to report on the construction progress. So it adds cost to the construction. In some cases, it could be like 25%. Now, if you want to know what a leads building looks like, go to the World Trade Center one now. That's a premium leads building, and it's the way that it's constructed and how it's monitored. So be leery of adding any kind of recommendations for certification of building. It is not required, and in a lot of cases, building codes change that you're actually trying to improve the materials and construction for all buildings. So you can be on the forefront if you want to, but it costs.
Yeah,
So,
the highest level for leads is platinum.
yes.
And the usual excuse or the usual rationale is that it will cost more money to construct, but will save money on energy, water, utilities, et cetera, down the line, which may or may not happen. And you've already put the money in. So good thing to ask about.
Yes.
Okay, here's a good one. Just came in from chat. Keep those chat questions coming in. There's some very good ones. Can bylaws be changed with regard to terms that a CBOC member can serve? Our bylaws state that a member can serve 3 two-year terms, and we are in year 6. It will be very difficult to find all but 2 new members and teach them our 5 years of experience.
Mm. So I believe the term limits are set by Prop 39 for each bond. I believe it's in the legislation. So the legislation supersedes the bylaws. So I don't think that that's something that you can change, unfortunately, because I know how it's hard to find people that have learned about all this stuff. And it all kind of hits you all at once when you first start in doing bond oversight.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, it's not a good idea to put in bylaws things that are already in legislation. It's unnecessary. And if the law changes, then it can be messy. And in California, the original requirement or the original limit was 3 two-year terms, but there is a ability to go to the State Board of Education to ask for an extension. And in my experience, the State Board of Education would rubber stamp those without any question. So if you needed to get somebody or want to get somebody to serve an extra term, it had to be asked for by the Board of Education or the Community College District Board, governing board, but the state board would just rubber stamp it. You had to give a couple months for that to be effective. Okay. Next question, and again, a good one coming in from chat. Are the auditors accountable to the CBOC as well as to the district? Can the CBOC utilize the auditors as a resource? And if so, how would you do that?
I think this is a good question for Sally. Sally, can you address this?
So we're asking if the auditors are
Responsible to the CBOC as well as to the governing board and the public, of course.
No. The auditors are responsible to the district and the board. And the Bond Oversight Committee, we can play a role, and in our county we have played a role. We've sat in on entrance interviews and exit interviews. We've had say in setting some scope of the audits and talking to board members and getting certain performance audits done. Like I think it was said that the compliance audits are the most basic, broad scoped. I think that's the right word I want for performance audit. It's very, very basic and doesn't go too far into. Carolyn, I think you used the word process.
Yeah.
And but in our county, as a Bond Oversight Committee, we passed certain resolutions that the board took action on, which set a broader scope or a more effectiveness and results performance audit is what I'm trying to say, which was a better performance audit from the standpoint of process. So we had a say in it. We had something to do with it, but no, they weren't responsible to the Bond Oversight Committee.
Yeah. That's been my experience. It's the district that does the RFP and the selection, and it's just the audits that I've participated in and got reports from are just looking at invoices and to make sure that the funding accounting was appropriate, and never really looked at the process to make sure that there was a process, for example, to see that a construction activity was completed before we paid for it. There's instances where work was built, but work was not performed. And that's a process gap in terms of internal controls. So we've seen that. And so you can ask the question to say, who signed off on the project? You know, I always say that when you're looking at invoices, you should only have 3 steps. One, that appeal was issued. The second say is that somebody received or signed off on the invoice. And the third one is that we pay the invoice. And the problem you have is on the second step. So sometimes it isn't signed off or the item isn't received, but we paid for it. So that's always a common problem. Any other comments? Nick, you have a comment?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, and so that answers that question.
I'm going to use the conference chair prerogative. I am a CPA, and auditors are not responsible to the board of directors. They are responsible to the public and other stakeholders. And so the auditors have a responsibility to the taxpayers, and they have a responsibility to the bondholders, among others. And as has been discussed, I think it's very, very good for the CBOC to have a role in both the selection of and providing the instructions to the auditors. And some agencies do that, and I recommend that very highly, as well as the audit reports coming to the CBOC, as well as to the board and the general public. But auditors are almost unique in that their responsibility is not really to the people who hired them and paid the fee, but to the people who will be using the financial statements and the other audit reports. Okay, another one interesting. And I think this shows that there are a variety of sizes and types of districts. And depending on how big your district, you may get into more detail as a CBOC than others. At our CBOC meeting, we receive a summary of expenditures. Shouldn't we be receiving copies of detailed invoices? What can we do?
Okay, I think all of us can respond to it. I'll start first is number one, you need to see the invoices. You need to see the details. You also need to see timesheets. Timesheets are critical because someone has to validate that a person was on site to do the work. And when you don't see that, you bring it is a red flag. It's one of the red flags you have. The other one that I've seen problems with are construction change orders. Construction change orders, you see like a materials list, and the materials list doesn't really give you any information on why you need this construction change notice. So, you know, the more detail you have, but sometimes it's more than you need, gives you the insight to ask further questions and bring it up to the district people. Any other comments? I think
Well,
I have,
Christine. Chris, you have a comment?
this is probably not going to help the person who asked the question, but it, in solidarity, in my first ever CBOC meeting, I was told that if I wanted to see invoices, I should run for board of trustees by the, so okay. This is why we're here.
Okay, Nick, you had a comment?
yeah, you know, I mentioned my presentation, district will say, well, the invoices are none of your business. And I had a situation when I said, well, maybe it is my business. So I finally got agreement. And that's when I started looking through invoices, and I saw, Performing Arts Center openings with this fancy catered food and entertainers pay. And these were all paid for by bond funds, or the purchase of equipment by the consultant, like cameras and so on, that were charged to the bond program that mysteriously went along with the consultant when they left the district. The invoices can really matter on a bond program. The second area, and it's a little bit off, maybe kind of detail you get into, but look at how your specifications are done on materials for bidding on hard bids on projects, and see whether there's any potential language in your bid documents that would give favoritism to a vendor who could benefit from a project. And bid rigging is what can occur. So those kind of things are maybe beyond the normal committee, but the details matter. The details matter.
Okay, that will be the last question. I'm just going to, again, use my chair's prerogative to say, this is a matter, I think, that each CBOC needs to decide for itself and what's appropriate and what's possible. When I was with the LAUSD BOC, it was not all unusual to have $200 million of expenditures a month. And believe me, getting down to individual invoices and timesheets was just not going to be possible for the BOC to do, even if they worked full time. But every CBOC, in my opinion, should have the ability to get into what it believes it needs to get into. And that can and should include the ability to get down to each and every individual invoice, and if necessary, each timesheet. I think those are good comments, but you just need to be flexible based on the size and what the members are capable of doing. This will take us to panel B, which I'm the moderator of. And here shortly will be our agenda for panel B. And you all have the conference program with the members and their bios. So I'm not going to bother going into their bios. So if we could bring up the PowerPoint for B, please. But we have 5, I believe, very well qualified and very experienced CBOC members. And next slide, please. And let's just get into it. And first up is Mac Moore, who will talk about financial audits. Mac, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Hello to attendees, and thank you for giving up your Saturday and your service to your communities. I think it's extremely important. I'm going to provide a brief overview of Prop 39 financial audits. First, what they include. Second, what they don't cover. Third, the responsibilities of CBOCs in relation to the financial audits. And finally, additional best practices that the CABOC recommends. And I think we should advance the slide here to the, yeah, there we go. Thank you. So annual bond fund financial audits are a core requirement of Prop 39. And we've gone over that a little bit. Moss Adams has provided a great overview, but essentially to reiterate, the audits are performed by an independent auditor hired by the school district, and they're performed in accordance with government auditing standards. The audits cover the bond fund financial statements prepared by the district, and that essentially is the cash proceeds from the bond issuances and the liabilities for monies owed to under construction contracts to build the school facilities. The audits include an auditor's opinion that the financial statements prepared by the district fairly represent or not the financial position of the fund and are free from material misstatement. So that's what the audits cover. But in addition to that, we should, cover or discuss what the audits don't cover. And this was a little surprising to me as a new CBOC members to find out. But essentially, the bond fund audits do not actually examine capital assets, school facilities, nor do they cover the long-term liabilities, which are the school bonds themselves. These aspects are included in the audit of the full financial statements of the school district. And so we recommend that CBOCs review their district's full financial statement audit in conjunction with the bond fund audit. In addition, the auditor does not fully evaluate or express an opinion on the adequacy of district internal controls related to the bond fund. That would be, you would need to have that extra level of performance audit that was discussed by Moss Adams. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's talk about the basic responsibilities of a CBOC in relation to financial audits. CBOCs are required to review the financial audits and any concerns the auditor may raise in that report and the district's responses to these findings. CBOCs are required to report to the public on the financial audit, and this is typically done as a part of the CBOC's annual report. Now, in addition to these basic requirements, CABOC recommends that CBOCs have direct interactions with their financial auditor. This includes working with their district on auditor selection and evaluation of the auditor, as well as participating in the entrance conference with the auditor, where the audit scope is discussed, and the exit conference, where CBOC members can ask questions about the audit before it's finalized and released. So that concludes my presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anton Muehlher, who will make a presentation on performance audits. Anton?
Thank you, Mac, for that excellent presentation. In 2013, the state legislature approved a bill that resulted in an audit guide for both financial and performance audits, starting with the fiscal year ended in June 30, 2016. Appendix A in the annual audit guide prescribes the annual compliance audit objectives. Bond monies can only be spent on projects in the ballot measure, and there can be no expenditures for salaries except for construction projects. Next slide, please. The compliance audit does not, and I repeat, does not provide the CBOC with the information needed for vigorous oversight of bond expenditures. The compliance audit does not tell the CBOC how well the monies were spent. The CBOC role is to actively review and report on the proper expenditure of bond monies for school construction. The CBOC needs to report to the taxpayers, quote, proper, close quote, expenditures. Next slide, please. An annual effectiveness performance audit is the best tool that the CBOC has to provide oversight. This is based on my 10 years of CBOC service, including being removed from my district CBOC twice. I think I might have a record in that regard in the state. A compliance audit does not provide the information the CBOC needs to determine if the expenditures were proper. However, Moss Adams in their presentation today outlined the objectives of an effective audit. If you go home today with only one takeaway from today's conference, it should be this. Every CBOC member should support annual effectiveness performance audits in their districts. An effective audit is the best tool for you to do your job. Go forth and do your duty. I'm on a mission. Lorraine, could you discuss websites?
Sorry, I have trouble unmuting. I'd like you to consider the concept that your CBOC website is a window. The public looks through that window to see the constructive bond program. The whole purpose of our being is to monitor that bond program for the public. So that brings up two questions. How does the public get to that window? And what do they see when they look through it? Access is how do they get to it? If you can have the best website in the world, but if the public can't get to it, it's useless. So you've got to work with your district to get an obvious link on their homepage to the CBOC. Some districts have drop-down menus and they'll say bond program, or it might say school construction program and have links to the facilities committee and the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. Make sure you spell out your committee and in the full name so that the public sees that word oversight. All right, now they've found the window. When they look through, what kind of content are they going to see? Next slide, please. Next, thank you. There's legal content that's required to be on the website. We've talked about Proposition 39 and Education Code 15278. Education Code 15280 specifically mentions the website. The first section says that the governing board shall provide resources so that the CBOC can publicize its conclusions. And in Part C of that code, it says that the CBOC's reports, their meetings, documents given to them are all public records, and they should have a website to post them to maintained by the board. However, two ideas. One, both of these sections are shall requirements, not may requirements. And two, maintain does not mean own or control what's on it. The CBOC will make up its agenda and the district staff will post it on the website. Below are some organizations you can check out for best practices. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, I've listed here a website and I've broken it up into 5 categories. And in the categories, I gave some examples of best practices. Let's look at housekeeping. Housekeeping, you've got an agenda. That's a requirement. You also have a meeting calendar. Now, that's not a requirement, but it's nice to have listed when you're going to be having meetings throughout the year. Some CBOCs have it monthly, some have it quarterly, some have it yearly, so that the public can use that calendar when they're making up their personal calendars. This ends my presentation. Marcus Crawley is going to talk about CBOC independence. Thank you.
Hello, Tom, am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, thank you. My name is Marcus Crawley. I'm on 2 CBOCs, and I want to talk about the CBOC annual report. I think we all understand that the chief duty of a CBOC is to make an annual report to the public regarding the school district compliance with bond requirements. Now, most CBOCs that I've looked at mistakenly state that they are reporting to the board or the district. The Education Code statutes require that the CBOC makes the annual report to the public. Now, the first thing I look at on a CBOC annual report is the CBOC reporting to the public? Now, the primary document that the CBOC uses as a basis for the annual report is the required 2 annual audits, the financial audit and the performance audit. Now, when these 2 audits conclude that we find the district's expenditures are in compliance, the annual report should be reporting on other requirements as well. For example, did the district submit the audits to the CBOC on time? Did the district fill the vacant CBO seats? Did the district appoint each of the CBOC members to a term not less than 2 years? I've noticed that this not less than 2 years requirement is often violated, especially when the district is establishing a new oversight committee. The district often creates staggered terms of service for the members by assigning half of them to a 2-year term of service and the other half to a 1-year term of service. Instead, the board should be assigning the other half to a 3-year term of service. And that would accomplish the staggered terms and comply with the statutes. Next slide, please. So the annual report can include news-related stories such as a relevant grand jury report, a whistleblower report, comments on diversion from the facilities master plan, previous audit recommendations, and best practices. The recommendation section at the end of the annual report should list actions by the district that will help the CBOC function better. So that's what we want, an informative annual report. So thank you. I turn the mic over to Tom Rubin to tell us more about memorandums of understanding.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about the way things should be. And I will tell you that very, very few CBOCs currently have all of this, and many of them have none of this. A memorandum of understanding, which in my opinion and in CABOC's opinion, every CBOC should have, is a legally enforceable contract between the school district or community college district and the CBOC. And it spells out the duties and powers of the CBOC and the responsibilities of the district to support their CBOC. And crucial of this is independence and self-governing nature of the CBOC. And then for the CBOC to have access to records, personnel, the board. It should have its own budget. It should be involved in the audit process. And if you take away nothing else from this entire conference, for God's sakes, get your own independent CBOC legal counsel, not a staff member from the district legal counsel or from the district general contractor, someone who reports to you and only you. Next slide, please. Moving on to bylaws. These are the internal rules of how any organization is run, which are set by that organization, in this case, the CBOC. The CBOC should adopt its own bylaws. The district and the board have no role. And if you have those imposed, just say, thank you very much, we'll do our own. This is our job, our role. We have to set it up how we want to work. Things such as when and how we schedule meetings and what's on the agenda and what we will want to hear from the district. These are things that each CBOC has to be able to control, as well as all the other general things of how you run any organization. How do you make this happen? Next slide, please. This is not going to be easy. You need to deal from a position of power. You need to be able to say, you need us, board. You need us, district. You have a bond issue going to the voters. Do you want your CBOC to get up and say that we have the sufficient independence and the district has the procedures in place that the money will be well spent? Or do you want your CBOC getting up and saying, you know, we have no idea how the money is spent. We are not able to do independence. We don't have the power. So build your community, build your stakeholders, and know when and how to approach. Finally, we are putting together templates that will be on the CBOC website, we hope within a month or two, that you can use to begin the process. And CBOC is there for you to help you get through this process to establish your MOU and bylaws. Okay, we'll now turn it over to questions. And Carolyn will be asking the questions. Over to you, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay, we have a couple of questions in the chat room, and the first one is, are documents that we identified in this presentation, what is required to be posted on the website? What documents are required? We referred to the website earlier, and Lorraine, you handled that, so.
Yes. Yes, they are public records. Any reports you do, any things you receive from the district and your minutes, et cetera, they're all public records. So they should be on your website.
Anything that goes to the BOC in a meeting, first of all, it should be in the agenda package so everybody, including members of the public, have it in advance. But if you get the situation where the district or someone presents a document at the meeting, and I'm sorry, we didn't have time to get it ready in advance, that should be in the minutes of the meeting and therefore should be on the website.
Okay, second question is having to do with the CABOC preparing their annual report. The annual report is drafted by the CABOC members, and depending on their scheduled times of meetings or the activities, it may take a long time for them to get any information. What would we recommend to provide or to report on an annual report on a timely basis? You know, considering that some CABOCs might meet once a year and they may not have much to report. Any suggestions?
Marcus, why don't you take that?
Thank you. Yes, I think that one of the mistakes right there that's brought up is that they only have one meeting a year or one meeting a quarter. They need to schedule for themselves as many meetings as necessary to do their job of proper reporting to the public. Typically, a subcommittee would take a look at and report to the public on the annual report regarding the two audits and anything else that's relevant. So the full committee doesn't need to schedule itself if this subcommittee gets its work done. And then as soon as it's ready, then it's submitted to the entire committee to be approved, and then posted on the website and submitted to the public.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, so we'll go to the next question. They understand, our audience understands that CABOC, that's us, has embraced MOUs. But should the district CABOC members be allowed to decide whether to use an MOU or is this a directive from CABOC?
Okay, this is my topic. MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding, I believe, and CABOCs believe that this should be a matter up to each BOC, each CBOC to decide. We believe that just about every CBOC would be better off having this understanding and having it documented in writing, because anytime you're in a relationship where something might go bad, it's best to have something in writing, an enforceable contract. If there is a CBOC that doesn't want it for whatever reason, well, we may question that, but again, our entire premise is that CBOCs are independent and should be allowed to make their own decisions on how they will fulfill their responsibilities under law to the stakeholders. We are trying for legislation that will give CBOCs more power to say, we control our own destiny. We do our own bylaws. We have the right to negotiate an MOU with our governing board.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question. Should district staff be allowed to selectively remove specific bylaws from the CABOC approved set of bylaws? So it's like the school district has oversight and can choose what they want to add or remove from the CABOC approved bylaws. Any comments?
Well, again, our recommendation is that the governing board and certainly the staff have absolutely nothing to do with the CBOC bylaws. They are entirely internal to the CBOC, and they should be implemented under an MOU that can only be changed by the mutual agreement of the CBOC and the governing board. And so the board and the staff have nothing to do with the bylaws. That's the way it should be. As we very well know, I bet if we took a poll of the CBOC members on here, I would be surprised if 10% of the respondees said that they did their own bylaws and they were totally under the control of the CBOC. And that is something, again, we're going to try for legislation to change.
Thank you,
In the
Tom.
meantime, you got to live with what you have. And so if it comes from the board, you have to say, I'm sorry, we can't accept that.
Okay, next question. Who pays for the CABOC independent counsel and other expenses being recommended for the CABOC to incur as part of their independent role?
Okay, again, my topic. Under the implementing legislation for Prop 39, the district is required to pay for the operating expenses of the CABOC. And further, there's a requirement that that cannot be paid out of bond funds. So first, CABOC certainly wants the CBOCs to have enough budget to do their job. And that should be something that the CBOC negotiates each year with the district. And we are taking a legislative position that since having an effective and independent CBOC is so important to oversight, this should be something that is allowed to be funded out of bond funds. And in my experience at the LAUSD, which is by far the most expensive CBOC in the state with its own staff, it was a fraction of 0.1% of the entire budget. And I think we would all agree that a good working CBOC is worth many, many times that.
Okay, next question, and I hope I interpret this correctly, but does CABOC, our organization recommend that district CBOCs turn over their responsibilities of setting their own agenda and preparing their own motions? So the way I interpret this is, are we recommending that the districts take on more responsibility for setting their own agendas and preparing their own minutes?
Marcus, I think this is part of what you were talking about, but everybody chip in.
Okay, I'd like to say a few words about that. Yes, I think that each committee, well, let me back up. Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, on this one, does CABOC recommend that the CBOCs turn over their responsibilities of setting their own agendas and preparing their own minutes?
Thank you. I do think that each CBOC should take the responsibility for drafting their own agendas. That is typically, in my experience, they sort of give some kind of little bit of guidance to the district. And the district generates the agenda and publishes it. And I think that's an abdication of their response, of the CBOC's individual responsibility to take control of their own future. So they should do that themselves, even if the district can do it just as well. They have to be marching down the path of independence whenever possible.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions that have to deal with how do CABOC members acquire an independent legal counsel to represent them, and who pays for it? So it's like, how do they get a legal counsel to represent it, their own individual committees?
I'd like to speak to that. On the CBOCs that I've been on, the CBOC members are generally very reluctant to ask for help. They think that if they ask for some kind of legal advice, it should be from the district, or that they would not want the district to spend the money to give for the CBOCs to have independent legal advice, because that would be taking away from the children of the students. And I think that is poor thinking, but the education code does say that the CBOC, that the district shall provide advisors to the CBOC whenever they require it. So the number one step forward is a strong chair. The chairperson should be able to state that, hey, we want a independent legal advice. So you hire us a lawyer, or we will tell you which lawyers, or something like that. And to my knowledge, other than Tom's experience with LAUSD, I don't know of any CBOC that has been bold enough to demand independent legal advice.
Well, it worked very, very well at LAUSD. And we were fortunate back in the day to have a strong board and CBOC chair and other members of the CBOC who were able to work with the members of the board and the superintendent to say, you're better off having a strong CBOC. And here's what we need. And we got them to understand and agree. And again, this is selected by the CBOC, paid for by the board. The procurement goes through the district in the normal way, but the selection is done by the CBOC members. And it is not picked by the board. It is a law firm that is independent, does no other work for the district, and is prohibited from doing any other work from the district. So it will remain independent, work solely for the CBOC. And I can't tell you the number of times the ability to have a strong, independent lawyer working for a strong, independent CBOC save the district a huge amount of money and a lot of problems. However, not all of the people on the board, not all of the people who worked for the district necessarily agreed with each specific at the time. So you need to get it, you need to get it early, and you need to make sure that you have the powers of CBOC to have it and to keep it, and it can't be taken away. That is not easy.
Carolyn, can I add on to that?
Yes, go
Certainly.
ahead, Anton.
West Contra Costa Unified School District has had independent legal counsel for over 5 years. And the way this works is that the client attorney privilege runs to the CBOC. Actually, for a district bond counsel or district attorney to provide legal advice to the CBOC is in conflict with the California Bar Association canons for an attorney. The district's bond counsel, the district attorney client of privilege runs to the district. So they cannot provide independent counsel to a CBOC because there's a basic conflict of interest. And their own California bar canons states that they cannot do that. So to me, no CBOC should take legal advice from any district bond counsel or district attorney, because the client privilege should run directly to the CBOC.
Good comments, Anton. Any more comments from any other panels? Nothing. Okay, next question. Much of the work of the CABOC suggests the need for members with technical skills, for example, construction or accounting experience and expertise. How do we ensure that CABOC memberships include people with these capabilities?
Mac, would you like to take the first pass at that? Though I think a lot of people might have some comments. Over to you, Mac.
Sure, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to talk a little bit about expertise and then some helpful suggestions. So I would counter this a little bit, and I would encourage people to participate even if they don't have auditing or financial or construction experience. I think that's helpful, but I think more important in the recipe for success of a CBOC are people who are willing to put in the time and effort to learn and to pay attention to what's going on. So that's my personal opinion. But on the other hand, I think in terms of recruitment, this is something that often, certainly in the case of West Contra Costa County, oftentimes this is the purview of the CBOC itself. It should be the board of the district and the district that is actively recruiting, but oftentimes it's the network of the existing CBOC members to recruit others is sort of a critical factor in obtaining the right sort of expertise that a CBOC needs. Thanks.
Yeah. Could I jump in here?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm one of the type of people who does not have accounting ability, or I haven't worked in construction. So that's why you need a training program for your new CBOC members. Some school boards provide this, but the CBOC, you have to, in your handbook, say what has to be done. In other words, suppose you ask someone to come in and tell you, what are the red flags I should look for in the financial reports that are given to me, or in the status reports on construction? What should I be looking for? And so it's important to have a good training program up for this. Thank you.
Carolyn, could I comment on that also?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the things that I would look for is curiosity. If you get a change order that's 10% of the project, you don't have to have construction experience to ask a question. Why would you have a 10% overrun on a project? Why is the project a year late? So I think some of the best CBOC members are, a parent who has a kid going to the school that's being constructed, and they see these kinds of cost overruns. So I think just curiosity and be the willingness and the courage to ask a question about it and to follow up to get the answer.
At LAUSD, we did it a little bit differently from most school districts. We had a bond oversight committee before Prop 39. And to a great extent, Prop 39 is based on what LAUSD did. And we had members that were appointed by various stakeholder groups, such as the American Institute of Architects, AARP, not just named by the district for somebody who was an AARP member, but somebody who AARP said, this is the person we want to represent the senior citizens. And it worked very well. I will tell you, it was a pain in the tail to keep those various organizations to keep nominating people when there was a need, but it worked very well. And that way we got a lot of people with specific experience who had the knowledge to head a subcommittee or a task force and were there to ask the detailed questions. And that worked very well for us to get a collection of various experts. But I think what Anton said is the most important, as in 80% of success is showing up. You want somebody who will come to the meeting, have an open mind, and is curious, and will ask a question, maybe about something they have very little knowledge of, but be willing to say, well, I don't understand why this change order is necessary. Can somebody please explain it to me?
Could I make one other comment, Carolyn?
Yes. And answers, okay.
I was looking at the financials for a district yesterday. They spent $2.5 million of their bond funds on professional services and $1 million on construction. So I looked at it, and it looks to me like they're spending their bond monies on maintenance projects. They spent 2.5 times money on maintenance projects, which is not allowed under the bond, as they did on construction. So to me, that's just being curious and seeing where the money is being spent.
Okay.
That's something that a CBOC needs to get into and look at. It may be that what they were calling maintenance projects, such as painting or something, or repairing a roof, was a capital improvement, such as replacing an old roof that was no longer working, that would be allowed. But unless the CBOC gets an answer to its questions, it doesn't know.
Yes, correct. Okay.
One more
comment, Lorraine?
Yes, please. Thank you. A lot of this depends on your publicizing that you have needs for the CBOC. If you have positions open, work with either the district's community outreach person or send notices to the city councils. After all, their city taxes are going toward this bond construction, and let them know we have openings. Can you advise anybody to us that might have auditing experience or financial experience or construction experience that doesn't work for the district? And maybe they could help you. Okay.
That wraps up for this question, and I'll move to the next one. Are CABOCs legally separate entities who have the right to enforce contractual agreements?
I'll take that.
Okay, Tom.
This is an interesting question, and you want to say that you have it. This is not, to the best of my knowledge, been decided by a court of law. But even if you do not have a independent entity situation, if you have an MOU that's a legally enforceable contract, you have grounds to stand on. And so in the opinion of the LAUSD attorney, a very fine person, I will add, that was a legally enforceable contract. And so it bystepped the question, which again has never been resolved by a court of law. This is something that we're trying to clarify through the CABOC's legislative program. And I'll leave that at that.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next question. If the district is paying for the attorney, isn't the district the client? I would just like to understand how an advisory board can act as a separate legal entity.
And again, this is a matter we worked out through the MOU to the mutual satisfaction of everyone. And you will often find in law, and I'm going to try to not sound too much like a lawyer, which I'm not, but the person who is paying for the lawyer is not always the client. But you need to have that understanding before the lawyer is engaged. So this is one of the reasons you need to have that MOU. And again, that's why we need to have a little bit better legislative understanding of how it works. But it can work now. It does work now. We would like legislation that makes it very clear that each district is required to provide independent legal counsel to the CBOC if the CBOC desires it.
Carolyn, can I also comment on that?
Yes, go ahead, Anton.
The California Bar Association specifically provides for third-party payment. In the case of the West Contra Costa, the school district pays the bill, but the attorney-client privilege runs to the CBOC. And this is provided for in the State Bar Association canons, as Tom outlined, where a third party is paying, but the key is, who is the client? The district is not the client in the case of West Contra Costa. The CBOC is the client, and the CBOC has the attorney-client privilege.
Thank you, Anton. And we'll go to our next question. We have a lot of questions with independent legal counsel, but here's another one. Even though the district must provide advisors, should staff decide who those advisors will be? For instance, when a CABOC demands an independent legal counsel, should staff be allowed to force the district's bond counsel on them instead?
Absolutely not. Again, CBOC needs legal counsel that reports to it and only it. Now, there are many times where things come up where the CBOC is going to want to at least begin by relying on the district's counsel. For example, if a major provision in a bond program is to upgrade the internet access and the computer learning, and the CBOC has questions on it, then I think it is perfectly reasonable for the staff to say, okay, we will have our experts come by and make a presentation. And the CBOC should listen to that and says, okay. And then they may have some questions and then say, could you get back to us on this detail? But if it gets to a situation where the CBOC says, either we don't understand that, or we are not being provided the information that we need to understand what's going on, then the CBOC needs to have the power to do its own research. And this can be difficult, particularly if you're talking about hiring somebody that will work for the CBOC. Now, if you do that, if the CBOC has an attorney, an independent attorney that works for that, if the attorney hires the expert, then you are guaranteed there is a client work product relationship through the CBOC attorney. And there may be a budget for your legal counsel that includes the hiring of experts if needed. That is going further than just about anybody has ever gone with CBOCs. But there is a way to do it, and there is a way to have those experts work for the CBOC. I hope you never wind up in a situation where you are questioning the competence and/or ethics of your district that much, but there are many people who are on this panel who have been there, gone there, and seen what can happen.
Okay, Tom. Okay, we have this question. I think, oh my goodness, this is a probably for us, a promotional opportunity. This one question, where do we get training, workshops, and continuous training? Is there other workshops and or conferences?
Anton, why don't you start that one off? I think that's the main purpose we exist for.
Yes, we have a whole range of activities that we would have in various stages of planning. In other words, I would like to see a monthly a catalog of online trainings. It could be on demand. We could have scheduled monthly trainings. We could go into podcasts. There's a whole range of training activities that we are working on. One of the main things that we'll be doing in the next quarter is soliciting a financial advisor to help us seek grant funding for our training program so that we can implement it. We're working very closely with the State Treasurer's Office, who just announced 2 days ago, and I think you should take a look at what they've come up with. The California State Treasurer 2 days ago announced a training platform for elected officials in terms of bond issuance. And we're working closely with the State Treasurer in order to get some of our training incorporated into their training platform. So we have a variety of activities. Most recently, we entered in with the University of Southern California for a strategic planning study that was presented to our board on August 14th, which is a 67-page report, which outlines a number of our plans going forward. So the answer is yes.
We have a number of activities that are underway, and frankly, we don't want to be in a position where we announce something, even if we're fairly far along, until we're absolutely sure that we will be able to provide it. But this has been something we've been working on very hard for a long time, and we're making good progress. Right now, go to our website. For example, we have an extensive list of questions and answers on a variety of topics. We have the contact us, contact CABOC point on the website. If you have a specific question, contact us and we will get back to you. And there's a lot of materials we have that we can help you with. And if you need some one-on-one assistance, we can provide it in many, many cases. So let us know what your specific concerns are and we can help.
Okay, thank you for
Could
that.
could I add something, Carolyn?
Yeah, who's this?
Lorraine.
Oh, Lorraine, go ahead.
I'm on the CBOC for the West Contra Costa County School District. And they do a lot at our meetings. They do a lot of presentations where they'll have slideshows and all. And if you go to their website, they have these taped presentations on their website. So check your district to see if they have anything like that. And maybe CABOC could check with the districts that have that sort of thing and get some library for you.
Thank you. I know I have gone into their website to just download their audit reports as well as their space standards. They have tremendous amount of information in that particular district. So it's, you know, you can go looking around and seeing what other school districts do. Now, okay, now I got a comment, and this is one that says CABOCs are not advisory. They are oversight committees. So they're not advising anyone. They're providing the oversight to us. So I don't think there's a question I think that we all agree to that one. And then next question, is it legally required by legislation for a district to provide independent legal counsel? Another one about legal counsel. Tom?
Well, admittedly, right now, this is a little bit up in the air, there is a provision, there are provisions in existing legislation that that the district will provide advisors to the CBOC, and 2, that the district will pay the expenses of the CBOC. So I don't think it is too big a jump to say that that is something that's already in statute. Now, again, this is something that in our legislative agenda, we want to get made crystal clear that there is an absolute requirement that the district must provide this. And again, we are also looking at saying that it can be paid for out of bond funds. There are districts that do it right now and have been doing it for quite a while. So I think it's very clear there is no legal prohibition against doing it, as well as the things I've mentioned that say that the district should do it or must do it. But there's enough wiggle room in there right now that there are a lot of districts that say, no, we don't have to do it. We don't want to do it. It's our decision. We aren't going to do it. And we're trying to close that. And the best way to do that is with legislation that says, no, this is a requirement. So we're working on that. But right now, it's still something that is being argued.
Okay, I have another question. Can my district board remove me from the CABOC?
Well, why don't we ask some of the CBOC members who have been removed? And let's start with Marcus and then on to Anton.
Well, I have not been removed. I do have an opinion about that. And when one examines the Education Code 15278, there are no provisions for removal of a CBOC member for any purpose other than they have already been termed out. Now, occasionally, let's say a CBOC member, their term of service is not removed, or is not extended, but that's a different situation. So I believe your question is, while they're still in their term of service, can they be removed? And I believe the answer is there are no provisions, although if we read the district generated bylaws, they generally provide some reason that, yeah, we can remove them for any reason whatsoever, or for a particular reason, but the Education Code does not provide that they can be removed while they're still in their term of office.
Anton?
Yes, what Marcus said is correct in terms of bylaws. I've reviewed many bylaws throughout California, and a lot of them have clauses in there that you can be removed for any reason, including lack of attendance. And I believe those clauses make the CBOC, they're not independent. You cannot be independent with that type of clause. In my personal case, I was appointed to the new Measure R CBOC for a 2-year term, and then subsequently, the district argued that my prior term on the prior bond issue expired, and therefore I could not complete my 2-year term that they appointed me to. That matter is currently in litigation. So I think perhaps we'll get some guidance from that as we move forward.
And what they did with Marcus was, well, both of you, was interesting. One of the positions that CABOC has taken is that even if a district has multiple bond issues, it is almost always better to have one single CBOC that will handle all bond issues. And I won't go into all the details why, but we think it's very, very strong case. So what we get into is a situation where, for I think both Marcus and Anton, the district decided to change the CBOCs. And we even made an argument in one case that you can change the CBOC, maybe, still up in the air, but if you change the CBOC, the people you appointed to the previous CBOC are automatically on the new CBOC. And again, this is something where I think there is a need for legislative clarification to prevent these types of games from being played. I think we have time for one more question.
Could I just say, Lorraine, could I just say that there is an education code about removing people from the CBOC, but it deals with ethics, conflict of interest. That's all.
I do have one
Go
final
ahead.
question that comes in about the removal of a member. And the question is, can a member be removed if they no longer meet the requirement for which they were appointed? For example, no longer a taxpayer's rep.
Well, again, you need to get very specific in the language. It's difficult to do that because for that particular one, it says that they're active in a bona fide taxpayer organization. There's another one that you, for senior citizens, another one for PTAs or equivalents. Theoretically, it can be done. I will tell you, one of the difficulties is, what do you do when you have a CBOC member who just has lost interest and is not attending? And at LAUSD, we would go to a lot of trouble to get those people to resign, to the point where I would frequently drive out to that person's place of work with the letter of resignation typed up and ask them to sign it and not leave until they did, so we could get a working member. But again, this is a case where legislation needs to be there. There's sometimes when you have to take somebody off. What do you do when somebody leaves the state and you can't even find them to get them to resign? You know, crazy things happen. There need to be some way to handle those, but to be able to have a governing board or a superintendent be able to fire a CBOC member, no, for no reason, just cannot allow it. Okay, thank you very, very much for all those fine questions. The ones that we didn't get to, again, we will respond to in writing. And boy, are we looking forward to putting those together. Okay, we'll talk about that on Tuesday. Now, it is now my great pleasure that for exceptional service as a member of the Mount Diablo Unified School District, Measure J Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, to name Gina Hayes as the recipient of the California Association of Bond Oversight Committees First Outstanding CBOC Member Award. She has committed to ensuring the independence of her committee as required by Proposition 39. She persistently asks probing questions and steadfastly refuses to concede. The most recent CBOC annual report, which she co-authored, found that the district had failed to meet its obligations. School bond oversight and the accountability of school bond proceeds has been advanced significantly by the persistence of Ms. Hayes. We commend her for her fine work. Keep it up, and we need a lot more like her. Thanks again to Ms. Hayes. Now, one thing that everybody should be aware of, we have a feedback prize. After the conference, we will distribute a 3-question feedback survey. You will be entered into a drawing for a $100 gift card prize by returning the survey by October 31st. And your responses will help us improve our future conferences. And we would like to specify for the record that the $100 gift card prize is not paid for out of bond funds or any other public funds. So please, please, all of you, we would like to get your record. Also, every attendee will also receive a certificate of achievement for attending today's conference. Thank you for your time. We hope you got some good information and some good contacts out of this. Please, please, please do not hesitate to contact CABOC if you have a question, if there's anything we can help you with. Moving on to my closing remarks. Thanks for Moss Adams for sponsoring this event and their very fine presentation on how to perform an effective performance audit. In order to do bond oversight, you must have both good auditors that know what they're doing and BOC members who know what they should demand from their auditors. We would like to thank the members of our two panels for sharing their hard-won experience and tips with the other CBOC members and stakeholders that are here today. Thank you to the conference committee members for their hard work in making this happen. Carolyn Castillo, Anton Younger, without whom not only this conference, but I don't know if CABOC would exist, and all of his hard work. Keith Mueller for his incredible skills and persistence in trying to teach the rest of us non-tech people on how to use Zoom and make the presentation and making this conference happen. Thanks, Keith. Great job. Also, Linda Ruz-Lorenzo and Denise Sheldon, the other members of our committee. We worked very hard to put this together. Thank you for all the participants for their attendance, particularly for those that asked those important questions. CBOC's purpose for being is to provide information and assistance to CBOC members. As previously mentioned, all of the materials for this conference will be available on the CB website, and we will email out the full set of questions and responses. For anyone and everyone who has a question or needs some help in dealing with the technical matter or figuring out how to get to something to happen in a complex political environment that we all live in, we are here for you. Please go to the CABOC website. Someday I'll get those right. Go to contact us at the top right of the homepage. Fill out your contact information. Let us know your question, and we will get back to you. If it's a question, we'll try to answer it. It may already be on our website somewhere, and we'll direct you to it. We may be able to direct you to other documents. We may call you up and say, talk it over, even if you need some one-on-one help in trying to arrange something, we may be able to help you. That's the purpose we exist. We urge every member of a CBOC to join CABOC. We have a number of positions we would like to help fill to move our agenda along faster and more productively. You have heard, we have a legislative agenda, and it is ambitious. The more members from the more districts we have that can contact their assembly person or their senator and say, I'm a member of CABOC, I'm a member of a CBOC, we've got an issue. And CABOC has been working with people in Sacramento, and they've got some legislative things that need to happen. I really want you to meet with them and support our legislation. There are many, many other committees we're getting going. We want you, we need you, we will appreciate your help. Let us hear from you. We want you. If you want to receive emails and are not yet on our distribution list, we're more than happy to sign you up. There's no charge for that, and you'll get all the information you can stand from us. Finally, please tell all your friends and your fellow CBOC members about us. We're here for them. We're here for the members of the public, for the taxpayers, for the bondholders, for the teachers, for the contractors and the professionals that are trying to do their job. And most of all, we're here for the students. We need your help to make CABOC work. Thank you. Once again, thanks to all, and hoping to see you at our next conference. And members of the conference committee, remember, we've got an after action on Tuesday where we're going to be talking about how we can do even better next time. Thank you. And again, keep those questions coming in. We will answer. We'll get back to you. Thanks to all.